tutorial has been sponsored by The Last Empire War Z. The zombie that I've created today is inspired by one of the characters from the game. It's a mobile strategy game where you build up and protect your base during a zombie apocalypse. You can join alliances and fight with other players in the game. It's free to download and I'll leave the link in the description bar below. To start with, I'm going to be using witch hazel to clean the skin. This is an astringent that's going to remove any oils, which is key when you're applying a prosthetic piece to make sure it doesn't lift from the skin. I'm now taking a zombie brow piece and I'm placing that on the skin so I can see where it's going to sit, and then I'm going to go around the outer edge of the prosthetic piece with some translucent powder. This is going to give me a guide so I can see where I need to place the glue. The glue I'm going to be using is called Aide. This is a water-based adhesive for skin. What's great about using it for appliances is that you can wear it for long periods without irritation to the skin. The translucent powder has created a guide so I can see how far to take the glue up. Ordinarily, for maximum adhesion, we would glue down the brows as well, but as I'm only creating this for the tutorial, I didn't want to have to make even extra work for Mark to remove the glue. But you can check out my previous zombie tutorials for more information on covering the brows. I've also applied that Aide to the back of the appliance, and once the glue has gone completely translucent, you can then start to apply your prosthetic. Always place it on very gently first, that way you can still lift it up and move it about. The prosthetic that I've purchased isn't the most well made. I actually had to trim around the eyes and the gradient towards the thin edge was a little bit on the thick side, but once I got all the paint on and everything, the seams just become a lot more invisible, so don't worry if you can't get your edges completely thin. Once you've done your paint work, it should become a lot more invisible. So now I've got the majority of the piece in place. I've pressed it firmly on the forehead and around the cheeks, and I'm now going around the outer edges, sealing them down with a little bit of extra glue, again waiting for them to go translucent and then pressing that into place. The prosthetic piece that I'm using is made out of gelatin, so I'm going to go in with some witch hazel to blend the edges. I'm using a clean cotton bud, and the best way to get it as thin as possible is to use a rolling motion. Roll the cotton bud in a clockwise motion in your fingers. The edge will then form a slope as it dissolves and fade into the skin so that it's no longer visible. Now the appliance at the front of this is quite thick, which becomes more visible once you've got the foundation on, but once you get all the paint done, you won't notice it at all. You want to do this around the entire circumference of the prosthetic and around the eye area. You want to do your best to make sure that all your seams are as flat and as invisible as possible. If any areas lift, just apply a little bit more of the Aide. In my previous zombie tutorials, I've applied mouthpieces with exposed teeth and exposed jaw. So for this one I wanted it to be a little bit different. I'm going to apply a bite mark to the neck. So once again, I've mapped out the area with the translucent powder, applied the Aide, allowed that to go completely translucent. I've also applied some to the back of the appliance, and I'm now placing that on the neck. Before I stick the edges down, I'm dusting off the translucent guide with one of my BDELLIUM tools brushes. Once that's all in place, just go around and make sure all your edges are completely sealed, and then go in with some of the witch hazel to blend away those edges using the rolling technique. Next up, I'm going in with some of my sculpt gel in the flesh colour, and I'm mixing parts A, B and C together. C is going to give it the flexibility which we want because it's going to be applied to the lip, and I'm going to be creating a split lip. So I'm building up some of the silicone paste on one side of the top lip, and then I'm going to do the same next to it with a little bit of a upside down V shape in between. Leaving this negative space is going to allow us to apply some wound filler there to make it look as though the lip has torn. I've created a number of tutorials using the sculpt gel, it's so versatile. Feel free to have a nosy through my Halloween playlist to see this product in action. It's definitely a must have over Halloween. I'm now going into a cream foundation. This is quite thick and it's really full coverage, which is what we want because we want the appliance to take on that flesh tone without the need to consistently layer the product. One of the downsides to using such a thick foundation is it can be quite hard to blend on a prosthetic and sometimes needs warming up on the back of your hand. Fortunately, we're going for a mottled appearance to the skin, so for me it's just going to aid the appearance that I'm going for. You can see here it's really highlighting those thick areas that we've got on the bottom half of the appliance, which is a shame, but it doesn't matter because you'll see once we've finished the paintwork they will no longer be noticeable. I'm going into my Toby Zombie palette, which is an alcohol activated paint, and using the grey shade I'm defining the contours of the brow piece. This is going to make the face look more skeletal and gaunt. So for this zombie I'm going for a bit more of a theatrical finish to it. The result is still one that's very creepy and realistic, or as realistic as we imagine zombies. But I'm going to be adding a few different techniques to this that makes it look a little bit more theatrical and a bit more drawn. Firstly because I'm working from an illustrated image of a zombie, obviously from the game. and secondly because it would differ from the other zombies that I've created and it will give you more choice. So as you can see, I'm applying a wash of this kind of greyed out tone around the contours of the face. I'm also applying that colour and dragging it down the cheek towards the chin to make this area look a lot more sunken. The great thing about working with alcohol activated paints is that if you make a mistake, you can use a clean brush dampened with the alcohol to almost completely blend away the paint that you've applied. Here I'm using a duo fibre brush to apply the colour, and I'm working that in strokes. When the bristles are damp they form tiny little lines, and this is creating sketch marks across the face. Now I'm using a dabbing motion with the brush onto the skin around the neck and then using my finger to soften that, which you can see is creating a mottled appearance to the skin. Going back to my Toby Cells palette, I'm creating a wash of green and grey mixed together, and I'm going to use my BDELLIUM Tools splatter brush to apply this to the skin. And this is something you want to do in light washes to really break up that skin tone. So I'll be layering a mix of different shades throughout the tutorial using the same technique. To make the eyes look a bit sore and diseased, I'm using this kind of maroony purpley red shade. This is a cream based product and I'm using my BDELLIUM Tools 128 bent liner brush to apply it. I like using bent liner brushes around the eyes because when you're working on somebody else it allows the placement of the brush to sit flush against the skin. Going back to my deep grey wash of colour, I'm using my BDELLIUM Tools 116 short liner brush to define the fine lines around the eyes. We want to change up the texture of the skin and we want it to look a lot more gaunt and unhealthy. So picking out these areas and defining them is definitely going to do that. In turn, you definitely want to go in with a highlight shade next to those contoured areas, and this is going to help to make that area look more three-dimensional. If you'd like to see more on highlighting and contouring for a theatrical look, then check out my Disney Witch tutorial. Going back to the skin tone, I'm mixing another wash of green and grey, and this time I'm using a bigger splatter brush. This will result in larger speckles, making it more obvious and really breaking up that skin tone. Now remember, we are using alcohol to do this, so make sure you're not around anything that's flammable, and if you're working on somebody else, make sure that you give them time to breathe in between each layer. I'm taking a cream based grey shade and I'm working that into the eye sockets to give them that nice deep sunken appearance. Remember, it's about layering with this, so don't worry if you kind of disguise some of that red tone because we will go back in with it. I've added a hint of purple to that grey wash, which I'm now adding underneath the eyes. Now remember, this zombie is a bit more theatrical, so you can definitely afford to play with a bit more colour. I'm pressing a small amount of that colour around the front of the face. Again, it's just to break up the skin tone and create a bit more of that mottled appearance. I'm now mixing a little bit of the dead blood shade with a tiny bit of black, and I'm using this to line around the lip wound. You can imagine that when that lip initially tore, it would have been quite red. Now he's a zombie, it will be dead, rotten flesh, so we want it to be quite dark. We'll be going over this with some congealed blood, but we want the foundation of it to be the right colour. I'm going over with another coat of the dark grey to deepen those sockets and re-intensifying that reddy maroon shade along the lids. Now I'm going into two blood shades in my FX Skin Illustrator palette, and I'm going to mix that in with the darker tones that we've got on the lip wound. The reason we've got that mix is because the blood that comes from the zombie itself will be old and dark, and if he's been biting people, the blood that's going to be on his face from other people will be quite red. So don't be afraid to mix it up, it is a theatrical look. And I'm following the colours that I'm seeing on my reference image. So I'm now going in with the dead blood, which I'm going to apply across the chin. I'm using the brush to stipple the colour on and my finger in a stipple motion to fade the colour out. Going in with the aged blood and the black mixed together, I'm now going over the neck wound, which will be quite dark around the actual bite itself. And then on the surface of it, I'm using my splatter brush with a mix of the two aged blood paints and creating a splattered blood effect. On my BDELLIUM Tools liner brush, I'm mixing together the purple and aged vein blue to create a nice wash that I can apply to the skin to create some theatrical veins. You can make these as subtle or as prominent as you like. Around the bite mark, I'm creating sort of tree-like veins coming off of it, giving the idea that this is where the disease stemmed from. Going back to my BDELLIUM Tools splatter brush, I'm flicking some more of the aged blood around the mouth. Now I'm going into that black mixed with a tiny bit of grey, and I'm using one of my FX brushes from Sigma, and I'm using this to draw on some theatrical shading. This is a flat kind of duo fibre brush, and when the bristles become wet they separate into small tiny spikes, and this allows you to create kind of line work on the face, so the skin theatrically looks rippled. Now I'm going in with some Vermillion Clot blood paste, and this works like a wound filler, so we're going to apply this into the split of the lip. This is going to help to add depth to that area. I'm using a spatula to apply this, and I'm just sinking it into the wound and use my finger to smear some around it. I'm also doing this to the bite mark on the neck. I'm now using this clotting blood from MakeUp. This is going to give us that fresh blood appearance from having bit other people. This product is great because it stays looking fresh for long periods of time. So Mark's popped some contact lenses in, and now I'm just going to finish off mottling up the skin. I'm using a mix of the brown and the greys to create a nice light wash over the skin, and I'm using a stipple motion with the brush and a stipple motion with my fingers. One of the last things I'm doing is adding some wound filler to the chin, also around the neck, and then using my spatula, I'm pasting some into the deeper parts of the neck wound. I used a couple of shades of tooth enamel to give them more of a rotting appearance, and then finished off by applying some more fresh blood. And that completed my Last Empire War Z zombie inspired makeup look. Don't forget to check out the game, it's free to download, so I will link that in the description bar below for you. A huge thank you to Mark for being the most disgusting model. Mark also creates his own content, so I will list and link his details in the description bar for you. Don't forget I have a discount code on the BDELLIUM Tools makeup brushes below in the description as well. Hit subscribe if you haven't already done so. If you've missed my previous Halloween tutorials, the playlist is on screen, as are my social handles if you want to follow me outside of YouTube. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again soon. Bye!